Today at shop.dap.com we're going to be installing a BFI shift knob and boot on a MK7 GTI. Okay, so before we get into our install, first all the links to the products talked about in this video as well as the tools will be linked in the description below. And as always, support for purchases for parts like this or any others help support videos just like this one. With that said, let's get into our install. Okay, so when you're dealing with your shift knob, we obviously have our shifter here. This is going to vary a little bit for DSG cars, but it would be kind of a similar setup. So here's our boot here and the knob. And so what we're going to do is this actually just snaps up so we can pop it up there and get that out of the way. And if you take a look at the bottom, it's just there's these clips that hold everything in place. This has been off once before, so it's a little bit easier than it may be the first time. And then you can take a look here. Here's your shifter, and right here is a clamp that actually holds the boot on, and you need to cut this off with a pair of dikes or something else like that. These clamps tend to be generally pretty hard, so let's go ahead and grab a pair of dikes. Okay, so we'll move forward here so we can take a look. This is the clamp we're going to be working on here, and I have a pair of long dikes here. Gives you a little more leverage to cut it off. And then once you get it off, kind of spread that open. Careful because it will be kind of sharp. Now that's off, and you should be able to just pull that up like that. Okay, so here we are looking at our knob and our BFI boot. These go together. These are sold individually, so you can use the BFI knob, and they offer a bunch of different kinds, but we chose the Magma one. And so the Magma one was my preference. You know, there's a lot of different options out there. I prefer this perforated leather one. They have silver and black versions of these, as well as this leather is available either in this red Magma. I think there's a blue one. There's also a black one. There's a bunch of different styles. This is my preference. Just a little note, I've owned previous cars that had completely solid metal shifters. There was a short shifter that used to be back in the day made by B&M that was a solid metal. And in the winter it's very cold, in the summer it's very hot, so having a little bit of material there with your shift knob is helpful. It gives you somewhere to grab if it's really cold or really hot in that particular instance. So just a quick note. So we are going to be swapping both the boot over to the base and then the knob over here as well to this boot. If you were to be swapping this knob onto the factory boot, you would flip this inside out like so, and then you can take a look here, and there's this trim ring here that you would kind of pop off of here to get this off, and then you would swap it over that way. We are not doing it that way. A lot of people would probably want to keep this intact, that way they could swap back to stock if they wanted to, which is why you might want to buy kind of the knob and the boot together. That way you don't have to worry about having to take this thing apart completely. So aside from that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working with our picks here. Again, those will be linked in the description, but we're going to be swapping this base off, and it has this black trim ring here, and you have to kind of pop it past. All right, so that seemed to work the best. Is you kind of take these picks, get them into the slots, and then stick them in place, and then kind of push down away. And so there's going to be inner locking ring that kind of wraps around that you have to kind of get out all the way around here. So we're going to work our way around here. Same deal. And once you get kind of part of it out, the tension will kind of pull itself out once you get them snapped out of place. Starts to kind of do its work on its own. And there you go. Our base plate is off, and then we have our boot here, and now we're going to have to separate this boot from this black trim. You can obviously see where it's inside there. You need to separate it from there, and then we'll have to mount this boot onto this new, the original black ring. Okay, so as we're working around to get this boot out, what we're going to want to do is kind of, what I've found is if you get your fingers kind of behind the boot a little bit, and you can kind of use this to work around and maybe separate the points where it's glued, or they use some sort of like maybe glue and heat process together that kind of melds them together. You can kind of see along the edges are like these squares that mold them together. I would say this is probably easier said than done. I would advise you to be very careful because this plastic trim ring is not something that's going to be sold individually. So if you break this, you're going to be in bad shape because you're not going to have a trim ring and you're not going to have a shift knob. So it's a bad combo for sure. So I can kind of use this to work in a little bit, but and maybe loosen it up. And there's a decent chance with some of these spots, that one came up fine, that the leather where it's actually joined might tear because of how thin it seems to make the leather, whatever the heating process to join them together, it thins it out pretty good. So there's a chance you might actually tear some of this during some of this process. I think I would expect it as a possibility. I haven't yet, but I think it's something that could happen. As always, patience is going to be your best friend here if you'd like to maintain this without damaging it. It's possible a heat gun might even help you too, if you want to use a heat gun or a blow dryer or something like that to assist this process. This one seems pretty not particularly cooperative. I'm not sure that's going to work. And the only downside of using picks like this is they tend to be kind of sharp. So you can stab yourself pretty easily. And this corner is really almost completely glued. And the key is to find the spots that aren't glued, because if you push too hard on a spot that's glued, it's going to tear. But if, in this case, in the corner, it seems like if you come from up top, it might be able to come down, although it looks like ours is already a little bit cracked right there. Yeah. All right. Got a couple cracks, but that's mostly intact there. The bone tool is probably much better for these corners than a pick because it has kind of that wedge shape. All right, so after I've done a bunch of these now, it seems like it's actually easiest to take like this bone tool here, come now, and again, you have to have slack like what you have here to be able to do this, but come in from the top and kind of use it as pressure and kind of pull it around, and that's a pretty clean way to make that happen. That way you're supporting it on both sides and you're still able to use the material to pull it while supporting it so it doesn't tear on you And you have to kind of, as slack comes, you have to kind of move in closer, pop it a little bit further there. And this corner before we've even gotten here is pretty much gone, so I don't anticipate this one's gonna come away pretty clean. And there we go. And we got it off there pretty cleanly, which means that's salvageable, and we can proceed with this boot, getting it on. And as you see here, it's split at the corners here. The kind of V-shapes cut into it. That's to make it mount more cleanly. And you can see that this is going to be the back because it's wider, or I'm sorry, the front, and because it's wider, and then the more narrow section is going to be over here. So you can pretty clearly see where it's intended to go to line up. And again, you want the seams are going to be front to back. So okay, now here is this roll that doesn't look like much, but it's adhesive tape that BFI includes in their boot. And what we're going to do is take that and go around our edge here. I'm going to make sure I try to keep it tight up around this edge, because you want to get as much contact as possible here. Okay, so there we go. And probably don't have a lot of shots here at this, so you want to make sure you get this pretty right here the first time. I'm going to try to keep this thing as even as possible. We know, and then keep that seam in the center there. See, between those two clips, that's going to be our center point. And I wouldn't go down too far because you could interfere in its ability to clip on properly. So probably if you have too much slack, you could end up with a problem. And obviously if there's not enough, you could have a problem as well. So all possible problems in there. Same deal with the rear. I keep that center as close as possible, and that should get us square to where we need to be. Now, one note I wanted to make is I did not cut the strip that BFI included in this. It seemed like if you wrap it, it may not be long enough to make it all the way, so you may want to cut it and just run it from like corner to corner and not wrap it all the way around the way I did. Maybe just wrap it around each side on the corner. I used a little spray adhesive that I had to get this final corner that it wasn't quite all the way around to line up, just to make sure that everything stayed in place when you're going back together. It's probably not as important, but I believe that when you start to push things back together, if you have any slack in there, it's going to make your life awfully difficult. So, and I suspect I may need something like this bone tool to maybe push the leather back in place while we're doing it. So I'm going to start with this section, the narrower section here, and I'm going to get this in place first. So I got that one in place, and this is going to be a lot like the other way in reverse, where once you start snugging them in, they're going to kind of pull each other in. But because this fresh leather is here, you're going to really want to be careful, because the leather is not going to go in easily into this trim ring. So you're going to kind of have to work it around to get everything in. As you, and this edge here is kind of giving me a little bit of a problem. So I wonder if I can grab my pick here, get it under there, and kind of pull it towards me a little bit. Now in this case, there's something back here that seems to be hanging it up, so I'm actually going to unpop all these. This is the key with this type of work, is don't force stuff. If something doesn't feel right, back it out, figure out what's going on. There's a good chance this is related to these threads here, and so I'm going to try to squeeze these threads together a little bit to get them kind of seated in place, because I have a feeling right here, this seam coming around here is what's preventing everything from sitting down all the way. So let's just try that as well and see if that helps us. So it seems like that did the trick, and so it was either the leather hanging over, or it was just the threads in there that tend to keep it tight. But either way, all those are snapped in place with the exception of this last one that we got to get in. Now we have our boot on, and now we can work with our knob. So we have our knob, and then this threaded piece, this collar, and then these set screws. This is where it actually mounts the shifter with these pieces. So first we're going to start by inserting this piece into our boot here, and again the threaded part goes into the knob. So you put this portion down, and I'm going to flip this inside out and then push this in place. Now I'm going to get that seated in place, snug here, but then I want to flip it to make sure that the boot can actually clear this knob here, because you don't want to go too far in to where the material affects its ability to thread on. I'm going to get it seated right there where you can see that's all cleared there. So I'm going to unscrew this, and we can get this mounted in place. So all I did here was take a razor blade, I cut it on both ends, and then I rolled it around. I wouldn't recommend cutting this all excess off, because I have a feeling it's possible that you might lose some of the grip of this strap here, this zip tie that they include. Might not get as good of a clamp down around everything. If you start trimming off all the edges there, it might start to slip through the bottom of it. So I'm not super keen on that, and since you don't need it to be like that, I wouldn't really go down that road. So just get it out of the way so you can clear these inside, and then thread all your set screws in place, and then we're ready to go into the car. One note I want to make is I would not do these inside the car. These set screws are very small and easy to lose. They do include this Allen wrench, but you could drop those pretty easily inside. Now all we need to do, slide that in place, and I can grab our Allen, and then keep in mind when you set your depth, you have to keep the other knob in mind, because you have to make sure that you don't go too far down. You can control the height somewhat, but if you go too far down, it may not thread all the way down. So you can always play with that setting if you like. And if you ever have concerns about these set screws backing out, you can always use thread locker. I wouldn't go crazy with any high aggressive thread lockers, because you could end up with a problem. So once we're there, we're all set and snugged up. And I'm gonna get this set in place just so that we can get that down. Get the boot pushed down. Now we can thread our knob down. And last but not least, we take our coin. BFI includes. Take your adhesive back off, and this is for anybody who's crazy about orientation. Make sure you got your correct orientation. And then set your coin in place. And we are all set. Thank you so much for watching our BFI shift knob and boot install. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like